Hello, my name is Samantha Grayson, and I'm a student at the University of Cumberlands in the Master's Program for Literacy Specialists. As part of our program, we have been asked to do a action research where we find a need that's been in our classroom or in our school system that we think needs to be improved. One area that I saw in my classroom was the need for differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction is something all teachers strive to do in their classrooms, but it's very time consuming. It's a very good approach to have because we cannot teach the one size fits all. As part of my research, I'm going to look at the improving of reading intervention through the differentiated instruction in my classroom. How many of you raising your hand can tell me that you know all your students are getting ready to come into your classroom in the fall, ready to read on first grade reading level? No one can do that. Why can't we do that? Because we know as educators that we're going to have students coming into our classroom on a variety of different levels. There are going to be ELL students, special needs students, students from culturally different backgrounds. In the United States, we are becoming a more diverse nation. And because of that, our classrooms are going to be more diverse. We know that students will be coming on those variety of levels, above grade level, right where they need to be, and below grade level. So how as teachers are we going to plan lessons to meet those needs for our students? Today's classrooms are complete with a variety of academic abilities and learning styles, and it's becoming a more difficult challenge for teachers to help students in their classroom. We can no longer teach to the middle and hope for the best. The purpose of the study. During my first year of teaching, I quickly realized, wow, I have a wide range of learners in my classroom. How was I going to meet their needs? As wanted to conduct the experiment using those differentiating strategies so that my students would receive that lesson that would fit their needs based on their strengths and their weaknesses. And I wanted to see if there was a connection between differentiated instruction and reading motivation. So I'm going to look at student growth in reading and if students are engaged and motivated to become lifelong readers. Research question. My action research will answer two questions during the study. The first question is, how does differentiation of reading intervention impact student reading achievement in first grade? This is where I'm going to look at student growth. Students should come to first grade reading on a level D and ending the year on a level J. I'm going to monitor that growth of students. And how does differentiation of reading intervention impact student motivation to read in the first grade? That's where I'm going to look at if students are motivated, engaged in the lesson and in reading. Let's review. Students process knowledge differently, just like we do. And we favor different learning styles, such as listening to lectures, listening by doing, learning by hands-on activities, or listening to others. We have to take all those into consideration when we are planning a lesson and use a variety of those teaching strategies and learning styles to meet the needs of all of our students. I am a learner who learns through doing. That might not be the same for all of the students in my classroom. And different instruction is the practice of modifying and adapting. As teachers, we need to modify and adapt our lessons to meet the needs of all of our students, including the use of materials, the content, student projects, and our assessments to meet the needs of all those students. When you have an assessment, some students might need readers, some students might need scribes. You're going to have to look at each student and see what they need based on their strengths and weaknesses. Recent studies have been conducted to show that there is a correlation between differentiation instruction and student success. They conclude that differentiated instruction should be incorporated into professional development for teachers. A lot of teachers really do strive to do differentiated instruction, but they don't know how to do it. Differentiated instruction has been a big buzzword in education in recent years. But how do we get our teachers prepared? It's going to be on the school's responsibility to train our teachers so they understand what differentiation instruction is, what it looks like, and how it can be implemented in the classroom on a daily basis. And by doing that, we will see an improvement in our students. There are many benefits to using that differentiated instruction. For example, teachers can accommodate the instruction for all students by creating those individualized lesson plans. When modifying instruction, teachers must consider the students' needs, their strengths, and weaknesses based on the anticipated outcome. And that is a lot to ask teachers. You have to anticipate what they are going to do. How are they going to learn? By looking at students' needs individually, teachers can then make those informative decisions on where a student should be placed in a group and how their learning needs to be met. I know if a student is struggling based on an assessment, I can see, oh, wow, Billy did not understand the cause and effect relationship. So now I need to pull him back because everyone else in his group mastered it to give him that one-on-one instruction that he needs based on his needs on the assessment. So this is really a very data-driven component for teachers. Sampling and participants. The students that were used were 25 students in the first grade, and they range from ages 6 to 7. I had 11 male students and 14 female students, and students ranged in their reading ability. When I got my students at the beginning of the year, I had 17 students reading below grade level, 7 students at grade level, and 1 student above grade level. The teacher was me, and I completed my 3 years of teaching and will be conducting the study. And the study will be completed the first 9 weeks of the school year, ending in about October. We're going to look back at the first research question that we will answer through the study. How does differentiation of reading intervention impact student reading achievement in the first grade? So this is where I'm going to look at the student growth and monitor their progress through the 9-week period. Instruments and materials used. So looking at that first question, monitoring those student growth. The quantitative study, I'm going to have a baseline data from the Fontes and Pinnell reading assessment. And that is something our students will take multiple times throughout the year to gauge their reading level. We will also use biweekly running records using that Reading A to Z text you can get as a resource online that is already set for student levels. The lesson formats will follow the next steps into guided reading by Jane Richardson. And this just provides a format for our teachers to know, are my students the early readers, are they emerging, or are they fluent readers? And this provides teachers with a guideline. And then we will also be using a variety of texts and reading materials. Data collection. To begin this research, when my students come to school, that first 2 weeks, I will be collecting a baseline data using F&P, the Fontes and Pinnell reading assessments. Students will come and read a text, and I will monitor their word accuracy and comprehension. If they receive a 90%, they will be on a level, and if below, they'll move down. And I'm really looking for that instructional level of students. After we've collected those assessments, I will divide my students into the groups that they need based on their reading level. I will have all my level Ds together, all my level Hs together. And then we will start using the Reading A to Z text based on the standards that we are working on in the classroom, but the books will be on the student level. On bi-weekly, we will be collecting running records of the students, and that is where I'm looking for word accuracy when reading. And this will be during the student's second read-through of the book. If they get 90% of the words correct, they will get to move up to the next level. So if I have a student who's reading a level D book and they get 95% of the words correct, I will move them on to a level E. Also, I will consider their comprehension check. When I do the word accuracy, they will take a short little comprehension check that's made up of 5 questions that will focus on story details, and it will also focus on the standards that we are working on in the classroom. So if we're working on cause and effect and we've read a book about a boy who got hurt because he was on a trampoline, if they did not understand that cause and effect relationship, I might have to bring them back and work on those comprehension strategies with them to know that they are ready to move on to that next level. And after the 9-week period, I collected my data. As you can see, here's where my students started. Student 1 came to me at the beginning of the year on a level B. After 9 weeks of the intervention, he grew to a level D, which is where he should have came to me in 1st grade. So he showed a growth of 2 levels. I had a student come to me at a level H. They moved up 1 level to an I. Some students did not show much growth. I had a student who came on a level B, and 9 weeks later he is still on the level B. But then I had students who showed multiple growth in levels. I had a student who came to me on a level C at the beginning of the year, those first 2 weeks of school, and after 9 weeks of the intervention, he was on a level H, which is where he needed to be for a 1st grade reading level. In the beginning of the year, I did say I had 17 students who were reading below grade level. That is anything below a level D. So AA, A, B, and C. By my 9-week period, I then had 9 students below reading level after implementing the differentiation intervention in our reading groups. At the beginning of the year, I had 7 students who were right where they needed to be at grade level. So they were reading on a level D through J, which is where you need to be for 1st grade. After 9 weeks of the intervention, I then had 15 students. So I did see a growth in student improvement. And then at the beginning of the year, I had 1 student who was reading above grade level, so anything above a level J. And after the 9 weeks, he was still reading at that level. He came reading at a level M, and then after 9 weeks was still reading on the level M because we were focusing more on those comprehension skills. The average growth of my lesson was 1.32 jump in reading levels. And that shows me that there was an improvement in reading, in students' reading abilities after implementing the differentiation lessons. Okay, how does differentiation of reading intervention impact student motivation to read in 1st grade? So this is my second part of my research, and I'm going to look at are students motivated? Are they engaged? Are they excited to be reading? That's what I'm going to try to answer in my second part of my research. Instruments and materials. For this qualitative part of my study, I'm going to use a reading interest survey that will be given to students the first week and the last week of the study. And those will be pre and post. I will also look at student work samples, maybe writing pieces, their comprehension checks, and student interviews. Listening to student conversation during those reading groups, listening to them say if they enjoy reading, if there's a certain topic they're interested in and want to read more about, what is engaging to them. My data collection, pre and post survey, and this, like I said, will be collected the first and last week of the assessment of the research. Conversation with students during those small groups, and student work samples in their writing journals, because students will be writing about every book. And here's my data analysis. Let's go back real quick. So as part of my pre and post survey, I had an interest survey for students that had 5 questions. The first one was a scale of 1 to 10, and it said for students to rate how much they like to read on a scale of 1 to 10. So they would be lower on the scale if they did not like to read and higher on the scale if they did. The next questions, 4 questions, were answered as always, sometimes, and never. So for the I like to read for fun, students would answer they always like to read for fun, sometimes they like to read for fun, or they never like to read for fun. The next question was, it's hard to focus when I read. That lets teachers know if they maybe get easily distracted or they're not engaged in the reading process. I like to listen to stories, and I like when the teacher reads stories out loud. So those are the questions we will be looking at, along with their writing journal samples and interviews, which is the comments they make during the small group reading. So looking at my data analysis, this is one of the questions I asked students. I like to read for fun. During the first week when students took this interest survey, I had 20% say that they always like to read for fun. By my 9-week period of the research, that doubled from 20% to 40% of students liking to read. They were more engaged in their reading. They loved picking up a book. I had 36% say never, and then that went down to 12%. And for sometimes I had 44%, and then that went to 43%. So I did see a growth after that intervention was put in place of students liking to read. The next question was, it's hard to focus when I read. So I asked students at the beginning of the first week and at the end of the 9 weeks. At the beginning, I had 8 students tell me that it was not hard for them to focus when I read, and then that improved to 16%. I started with 32% of kids telling me that it's hard to focus when I read. So that meant for me as a teacher, I needed to find ways to engage them based on books that they're interested or hobbies or anything that they liked. That's where I, as a teacher, had to get to know my students. So 32% said that they had a hard time focusing, and then that went down to 22%. So there, I did see a growth in student focus after the intervention was put in place. The next question I asked was, I like to listen to stories. I had 40% of my students tell me that they always like to listen to stories, and then it grew to 52% always like to listen to stories, with 20% never like to listen to stories to 12%. So I am still seeing that growth, that students are becoming more engaged and motivated to read. My next question was, I like when teachers read aloud. I began with 52% saying they always like to listen to their teachers read aloud, and then that grew to 60%. I had 4% never, and then 4% never, so that part stayed the same during my growth. And then for sometimes 44% to 36%. So I am still seeing that growth of students are becoming more motivated to reading. The last thing I asked students was to rate themselves on a scale of how much I like to read. If you look at my bar graph, the blue represents the first 9 weeks of the research when I gave students that pre-interest survey, and the green represents the post-survey. So if you notice, I had one student tell me, nope, they do not like to read. They did not like it. And I had 6 students who said, rated themselves as a 4 of reading. But after implementing that differentiated instruction into our small groups where students were working with other students who were the same level as them, I saw an improvement that, hey, they're slowly beginning to enjoy and like to read more. And you can tell that from the data I've collected with the questions on the reading interest survey. So now my next steps, and this is where I want everyone else to come and play. I only did this research for a 9-week period. And there's 2 things I would like to change. First, I would like to change the population size and the length of the study. Population size. I only use the resources of my classroom. And while I did see some improvement, I would like to see more students. So I would like to utilize all of the first grade students in this building. So that's 8 classes of first graders. By utilizing them, we're going to give them that more differentiated instruction that they need to fit their learning needs. And then provide teachers with professional development. We're getting ready to go into our new school year, so we need to understand what is differentiated instruction and what is it going to look like in the classroom. And we need to have a guideline for every teacher to follow so our data is not skewed. And we're going to move students into groups as they go. So by having all 8 first grade teachers involved in this process, we can divide our kids up amongst all of us. So one teacher might get all the students who are on a level D. Another teacher might get the ones who are below reading level. And this will make it a little bit easier for teachers because then they only have to focus on those certain levels in instruction to help the needs versus the wide range. And that will make planning easier and will give us more time to focus on the needs of those students, of that group. And as students improve, we can have our weekly meetings and say, hey, Susie has been doing a wonderful job reading these texts. She is passing her comprehension score. We need to move her up. And if someone's falling behind, we can say, hey, they're not doing well in comprehension, that's affecting their reading. They might need to spend a couple lessons back with this group. And this is a way of working smarter, not harder, and all of us being accountable for every student that comes through that door. Next, I want to look at the length of study. Like I said, I only did this action research for a 9-week period. And I didn't have as many data points as I would have liked to have seen. While I did see that there was a growth, I would have liked to have seen more data. So, I would like to take this study at the beginning of the school year for 18 weeks, ending at the end of our 2nd semester in December. That would allow for more running records, students reading more text, and more FNP assessments. We would have 18 weeks. Instead of the 5 running records, we would have 10, and instead of 2 assessments with the Fontes and Pinnell, we would go to 30. And this would just allow us more data so we could see those needs that those students had. In conclusion, differentiated instruction, I did see an improvement in student growth and student reading ability, and their motivation to read. The differentiated instruction strategies were implemented to fit students' needs individually and support their strengths and needs. In conclusion, the study suggested that differentiation and student motivation has a positive correlation with one another. As the students were working with peers on their reading levels, they showed gains. So we're giving students what they need to be successful learners. Now it's up to us to take this data and implement it into our own classrooms and work together so we can make sure our students are going to be those lifelong learners. And that is all for my study. If anyone has any questions, please email me. Please let me know. I would love to sit down and talk with anyone about these strategies and how we can implement them in our classroom and at a grade level.